Hi, and I'd like to thank all the fine folks over at the Learning Revolution for welcoming my presentation for the Emergency Home Learning Summit. And today's session here, we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between synchronous and asynchronous learning when it comes to remote learning, especially, but it also applies to if you're doing any teaching in the classroom these days. And this session is called optimizing your learning time. So what, if you do have opportunities to be face to face with students versus only teaching and learning asynchronously, you might want to consider how you best use each of those scenarios so that you get the most out of your time. So it's great to have you in this session, or at least watching this, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to connect with you professionally in other ways. And this is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about because I do believe that this is at the core of the affordances that our technologies offer us. So, what is, asynchronous learning and communication? We're going to just first think about that concept. And it really is, in this day and age, a dominant form of information transmission in the modern world, right? The more technologies that we've developed historically, the more different forms of asynchronous communication, everything from printed, paper to non-live television, email, text messaging, all kinds of collaborative platforms out there, videos on YouTube, blogging and commenting, walkie-talkie mode on your mobile phone, and pretty much all printed, all printed materials ever produced, right, is all asynchronous. Of course, print material takes a little longer to distribute than an email, but that's not such a bad thing. So, I'd like to reflect on this, and, this really, in many ways, highlights, the remarkable transformation that our world has undergone in really, the last 20 or 30 years, but also a couple hundred years before that. And you think about all the other ways in which we get our information. How much of it in this day and age is live, other than maybe a FaceTime call or a conversation with a colleague at the water cooler. So much of it now, it really is in this asynchronous form. And, there's so much value in types of these forms of communication. And, there's whole learning strategies that are designed around this, such as flipped learning, peer feedback, global projects. But surprisingly, still a rarity in many classrooms to see asynchronous forms of communication used broadly. And why is that? Well, for one thing, still, teachers predominantly default to synchronous communications. And the reasons are probably pretty evident to most people. You are, after all, in a class together with other human beings, face to face. So shouldn't you use that time for this purpose? Once defined only by grading papers or writing feedback on the margins, asynchronous learning now, and it implies additional time that one has to put into it. Once class is over, to read and respond to all those posts and comments. It can be an additional burden, when the school day takes up so much of your time already and all the extra responsibilities put on teachers. And also it's easy to get fairly burnt out on making or curating all of these media resources. And then at the end of the day, you may not use them again because you're not teaching that class, or you decided to do something different, or your school may have a no homework policy. So it's really hard to get kids to engage with material once class is over. So despite the value and power of all these asynchronous forms of communication, adoption in brick and mortar settings is fairly likely to stay low. So, especially with home learning, remote learning, you can't do everything synchronously. So there has to be some asynchronous interaction going on, and you want to have that be as engaging as possible. So when should you use asynchronous learning in communication? Let's look at the definition first, in case you're still wondering. So synchronous, of course, is the same time and space, immediate interaction with students and teachers is expected. And you're going to provide real-time monitoring of understanding in a synchronous learning situation, ideally.